All right, I'm ready to go. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming today. I think we have some important information to talk about as we live in this device-driven world. We will be taking questions. If it's something that needs to be spoken about immediately, I'll try to indicate that in the chat box. Otherwise, towards the end, we'll leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. So I am a member of ASHA. I'm also an employee of ASHA, but I'm receiving no financial incentive for this presentation. So what is ASHA? ASHA is a national association. We represent about 185,000 speech-language pathologists, audiologists, speech and hearing scientists. And so my particular job is to represent those who work in the schools and provide resources, advocacy, those kinds of things. But part of what ASHA does is we promote May as Better Hearing and Speech Month so that we help the world to understand how important speech, hearing, and communication in general is to our day-to-day functioning. So as part of the Better Hearing and Speech Month campaign, we did some online polling. So we wanted to find out what about technology? How is it used? Who uses it? That kind of thing. How did it impact what we do in our day-to-day lives? And how does that impact what we do in terms of communication? So I want to make one thing very clear, is that we are not talking about assistive communication devices in this presentation. It is those assistive devices are the ways that we provide, that people have access to face-to-face and other communication. So we are not talking at all about that aspect of communication. Okay, so ASHA is a national professional organization. We're audiologists, speech-language pathologists. Audiologists specialize in preventing and addressing hearing and balance disorders, as well as providing treatment that involves hearing aids and other hearing devices. The speech-language pathologist identifies, assesses, and treats speech-language pathology problems, including swallowing disorders. So that's who we are. Our theme for this month in Better Hearing and Speech Month is Communication Takes Care. We know that that includes caring for our own personal communication systems, our ears, our throats, all that kind of thing. So ASHA commissioned a poll to better understand the role that technology plays in families. We surveyed over 500 parents, over 500 teenagers, as well as speech-language pathologists and audiologists. It's an important topic because there are concerns about the impact of the overuse of devices on language, learning, socialization, and hearing. Last year, we did a similar polling as part of Better Hearing and Speech Month, and we surveyed parents about the use of technology in younger children, and we learned how prevalent technology is even in very young children. Children practically out of the womb are connected to devices in some way, shape, or form. So what did we find? We did find that technology is usurping the role of personal face-to-face communication in daily lives. We learned that teens average at least 6 hours of daily personal device use. It means texting, checking phones, those kinds of things. We also know that headphones and earbuds are used a great deal and at very high volume. And teens report using those earphones and headphones at least 3 hours a day. That by itself maybe isn't alarming unless you stood next to a typical teenager as they're listening on their earbuds or earphones and you hear the loud volume. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. So why is this a concern? Why is all of this a concern? Well, parents say that technology is impacting healthy communication in several ways. First, not everybody is paying attention to conversation at the dinner table, as you're in the car, as you're spending time with friends. I've often been in the situation where somebody's checking their device rather than focused on the conversation at hand. I'm sure even in business meetings or day-to-day life, we're often involved in checking rather than checking in. Difficulty with meaningful communication. Because we're also distracted with our devices, we're not as tuned into the conversation and we're not contributing in the same way. There are concerns about how the devices impact our schoolwork and do homework and those kinds of things. And we certainly know that there are risks to hearing if we're plugged into devices and using devices at higher than normal or higher than appropriate levels. So parents say that rules work, but not everyone is setting them. You see this graph on the page, and we talked about which statement best reflects how you monitor your child's use of technology. 42% of parents said, yep, I set rules. 32% said they kind of set general guidelines. So, you shouldn't be using technology at the dinner table. Is that a rule? Probably not in this case. 15% said they only stop overuse, and 12% said they really don't do anything. They trust their children to use technology appropriately. And then the question was asked, how successful were these rules at managing your child's use of technology over time? 4% said unsuccessful. Of those setting guidelines, 52% that do set specific rules said they're successful, and 40-some% say that they at least have general guidelines, felt that those guidelines were helpful in managing the use of technology with their children. So parents say rules work, but not everyone is setting rules. So you can see that 42%, again, it's the same percentage, but you can see that not everybody is setting those rules. And I think parents have expressed concern, well, I might do it in my house, but not everybody else is, so that has some impact on my child. So a minority of teens report that they have rules, but they actually do respect those rules that they have. So here's the question, have your parents set rules limiting the use of your mobile device or computer? 42% said yes, but a majority said no. Do you think your parents' rules are fair if they do set them? 61% said yes, very fair, and another few percentage said fair, but there could be some changes, and only 7% said no, those rules were not fair. And then it asked, how often do you follow those rules? 34% said always. That's exciting. Anytime a parent's rules are always followed, we're excited about that. 58% said they sometimes break those rules. 7% said they don't follow those rules. So we know also that repeated earphone, headphone, or earbud use at very high volumes can cause irreversible hearing loss. And I want everybody to hear that irreversible part of the hearing loss. We know that hearing loss at a young age can lead to serious consequences, including difficulty speaking and understanding verbal communication, problems in academic achievement, including language arts, vocabulary, arithmetic, and problem solving. We know that there's a greater need for enrollment in special education or needs for extra support in classrooms if you have a hearing loss, even a mild hearing loss or hearing loss in just 1 year. Low scores on achievement and verbal IQ tests may result, especially if it's undetected or hasn't been addressed with amplification. Students report a feeling of isolation, exclusion, embarrassment, annoyance, confusion, and helplessness. If you have a hearing loss and you're not aware of it, or even if you are aware of it, sometimes you're reluctant to participate in activities with others because you're not understanding what everybody's saying. We know that also requires a lot more work to follow directions. We also know that there are numerous psychological changes, sleep difficulties, digestive problems, emotional development, stress associated with hearing loss. So we know if we can do things that prevent hearing loss, we're going to be so much better off socially, emotionally, academic, and in every other way. So it's important to do everything we can because not all hearing loss can be prevented. But we know that what's called noise-induced hearing loss, is what we're talking about right now, is very preventable. After presenting this information as part of the survey, we ask, after reading this additional information, are you more likely to set stronger guidelines for managing where, when, and how your children use personal technology in your home? 35% said yes, definitely, 38%, yeah, they're probably more likely, and 25% said no, they're not actually more likely to set additional guidelines. We know that the primary way children learn is through verbal communication. Person-to-person communication helps advance language development, social skills, attention span, and so much more. When children are developing their vocabulary and communication skills by listening, talking, reading, and interacting, it's important that they are not preoccupied with the solitary use of devices. Personal communication helps us to learn about turn-taking, reacting to listeners' responses, self-regulation, interpreting those nonverbal cues, listening and processing information. And we also know that verbal communication skills are a predictor for future reading skills and academic success. So that face-to-face interactive component is so very important for all of us to develop and continue to develop communication, academic, and social skills. When we presented this information as part of the survey, we asked parents again, are you more likely to set stronger guidance for technology use? And in this case, 43% said yes, definitely, 36% said somewhat more likely, and 20% said no, they're not more likely. We know that parents embrace tools for responsible technology use. There are things that you can do to protect your child's hearing, and we ask parents then, so how likely are you willing to do some of these kinds of things? First, be more mindful of modeling safe listening by keeping volume down when you use headphones, earphones, or earbuds. A total of 90% said yes, they're likely or somewhat likely, very likely or somewhat likely to do that. That's good news. Becoming more involved in your child's technology use and set clear parameters at home. 87% said they're very likely or somewhat likely to do that. Purchase headphones, earphones, or earbuds that limit the volume of any device that they're attached to. 87% that said they're likely or somewhat likely to do that. And finally, implement rules where my children have to take breaks from using those devices every 30 minutes to an hour to give their ears a rest. That's a recommendation that many audiologists make. And again, 86% said they're likely, either very likely or somewhat likely to do that. That's pretty good news. And news and guidance that we should also follow even as adults. So, are teens prepared to implement behaviors to protect their audio health? We ask similar questions then to the teens. Are you more likely to keep the volume down when you use your headphones based on what we've said so far? And a good 84% said yes, they're very likely or somewhat likely to do that. Play music or media without headphones. A little drop, but still 78% said they're likely or very likely to do that. Take breaks from using these devices every 30 minutes or hour to give your ears a rest. That dropped a tiny bit to 72%. Again, a practice that's highly recommended to protect your hearing. Or use headphones, earbuds, or earphones that limit the volume of any device that they're attached to. Is it surprising that that dropped to 67%, just a little more than half, saying that they're very likely or somewhat likely? That last number, probably those last two numbers, would like to move up just a little bit more, again, to protect hearing and communication. The majority of teens are willing to limit their device and communicate more in person. So we ask, are you willing to communicate with friends in person more? 83% said yes. Use my own device less, especially around my parents and family. 74% said yes. Use my own devices less, especially when at school. That dropped a tiny bit to 70%, but that's still good. Use my own devices less, especially around my friends. 69% said yes, likely or somewhat likely. Or use my own device less, especially when I'm at work. 64% said they were willing to do that. So the good news is both parents and teens are willing to curb technology once they're informed about the risk. 87% of parents are inclined to get involved in setting parameters, and 90% are willing to model appropriate use. That modeling is just so very important because we often do what we see those around us doing. So what are the solutions? It is really important to establish and enforce meaningful guidelines. What does that mean in your family? Well, perhaps at the end of this, we'll be talking about that a little bit more. It means in our house, and with many of us, what we'd like to see is having periods of time where devices just aren't used, whether that's at the dinner table, a couple of hours each evening, when children are kind of getting ready for bed. We know that that bright screen, sometimes seeing those bright screens impact how quickly we're able to fall asleep. So establishing times where devices really aren't used. Making sure that we have lots of face-to-face, person-to-person communication with our friends and our families. Again, as we talked about earlier, we don't learn deep vocabulary. We don't learn the nuances of socialization and social communication through screens. We learn it by interacting, just like anything else. You need to practice to be able to do it well. So making sure that your friends and family have lots of time for face-to-face human interaction. Keeping that digital diet is another suggestion that we have. So keeping a log of how much technology you use. It's interesting. We know a lot of diet programs or programs designed to help us lose weight show that just that logging of how much we eat and what we eat really helps curtail how many calories we consume and does improve, make us more likely to lose some weight. Well, the same thing is true about technology. Keeping track of doing logging of how much you're using technology raises our level of awareness of how much technology use we have in our day and really helps us be a little more vigilant about reducing the use of technology. Creating tech-free zones and activities. Again, we spoke about this just a moment ago. So in your family's plan, what are those zones or activities where you won't be using your technology? Making a pledge that the technology diet is official for the whole family. And I don't know who it's harder for sometimes, the teenagers, the children, or the parents. You know, how many of us, I just need to take this one more email or take this one more call or send this one more text. or check this website real quickly. So all of us are sometimes at fault for not adhering to the plans that we've developed. Create family events that are centered around interactive, fun, and enticing activities. That really is what entices us all to engage in communication and interaction. Is there something fun to do? Young as well as older children enjoy that time where they're getting time and attention from the parents. That's important to deliberately create those times. And then finally, reward those technology-free moments. So when you see your child reading a book or talking on the phone or just talking face-to-face with somebody, when they're writing, when they're doing their homework without their technology, reward those. Say, hey, I really like that you're reading that book today, or hey, what are you reading about? Let's talk about it, those kinds of things. And then it's also very important to be vigilant about the technology use and screen time use, which includes television, in young children. For a while, the National Pediatric Association was recommending a very specific number of hours, but moved away from that for a number of reasons. But really, especially in young children, as those brains are growing, as they're learning so many new skills, it's really important to step away from that technology and have that face-to-face communication, again, for vocabulary, sequencing, hearing, paying attention, following directions. Those are all best done in face-to-face interaction. So, what does this mean for us? Well, ASHA also has a number of different campaigns and resources. If you ever wonder, gee, is my hearing, is my speech, is the speech and hearing of my family and children especially appropriate? We have a program called Identify the Signs, and there's a little graphic here about that right now, that helps you to understand what's normal and what's not normal, and also then we'll give you some solutions to finding out what do I do if I do suspect that I or somebody in my family has a hearing or speech or language issue or problem. And I just want to make one comment. Often our friends, our family, other professionals may often say, well, don't get anxious about things. Most kids will outgrow those problems. And that's not always the case. Yes, there are some communication disorders that children do kind of outgrow, or problems that they outgrow. But trust your instincts as a parent, as a colleague, as a sibling or a spouse. If you really think there is a problem or you're concerned there may be a problem, get the evaluation done by a certified speech-language pathologist or audiologist. It's better to have the information and to learn that, no, it really isn't a big problem than to let a problem go. We know that early intervention to address hearing and communication disorders really is best practice, and if you can move on to things that are of concern more quickly and earlier in life, your outcomes are going to be much better. So what are the solutions? Again, knowing what's appropriate and inappropriate, knowing the early stages of communication disorder development, knowing what's normal and not normal. And again, we've talked about the identifythesigns.org campaign as being very helpful and for you to do that. So let's take a break and let's think about, are you concerned about the overuse of technology in your life? What are your concerns? And why don't you just type into the chat, those of you that are here. Any concerns out there? Well, I know in my household, we were concerned that we were both putting it aside, but having our cell phones on the dinner table. We've made a new rule. That can't happen anymore, and we've let most people in our families know, hey, if it's something important or an emergency that you need to get in touch with us during meal hours, call us, and we will try to answer the phone most of the time rather than trying to text us or emails or whatever. How do you think, let's go on if nobody has any questions or concerns or comments about your overuse of technology in your home. How do you think communication, learning, and socialization is impacted by technology? Do you think that is happening? Oh, here's Derek says, interpersonal communication loses its human touch versus social media. I think that is so true, Derek. You know, how many of us have read an email or a text and thought, what did they really mean? Or, gee, that sounded a little abrupt or abrasive, because we don't have that face-to-face communication that we can interpret expressions or gestures or the way we've used our voice. So we often do lose a piece of communication in that human element. It's disturbing, as last year we were reporting out the results of technology use in young children, and both myself and another colleague who was going to be talking about that happened to be at the doctor's office, and one was in a restaurant. And we both came to the next planning session saying, you know, it was so disturbing as we saw a child in the doctor's office getting a little bit fussy, as kids tend to do, and rather than interacting, the parent handed them their cell phone. And the same thing at a restaurant. We were both at a restaurant at lunchtime, in fact, and sat at a table next to a table, a family, and everybody was on their device, and there was very little communication. And I think that speaks loudly to how technology has taken over life. Alyssa talks about, my concern is with the schools allowing the use of phones all day. And I think that is another very good point, Alyssa. I think the initial intent was they could use their phones for academic purposes. Well, that's great, but how do you know when a child sitting in class is using it to look up the topic of what you're talking about or vocabulary or something, or using it for other purposes? It says, Anastasia said, I think we need more research on the topic, especially in that 3 to 8-year-old population. Deborah says, too much of any one thing is not good. Derek said that they've lost the battle with cell phone use in their schools. We know one thing in terms about the impact of technology. One thing we do know is movement is so important in young children's development. Not only developing their muscles and their fine motor and gross motor skills, but we know that movement is important even for processing information. And so that getting up and moving around versus being glued to some sort of device is so critical. Young children, old children, all of us, actually. Alyssa reports that her concern is using so much and impacting social skills and attention. Deborah says she sees it both professionally and personally. And Barrett says he notices kids multitasking all of the time. In gatherings, watching TV shows, they're always on their devices, and it's ruining interpersonal communication skills. You know, we talk so much about multitasking, but I think so much of the research shows we're really not multitasking. We're switching between tasks, but we're not really doing several things at one time, certainly not doing all of them well. And so if you're on your device and trying to engage in conversation, one of them is being compromised. Or if you're on a device and trying to do your homework, again, the quality of the interaction on your homework might be. My child, somebody said here that their child would rather play on their devices than answer when I call them. Children need to have balance and know when it is and when it is not appropriate to use them. Anastasia talks about the cell phone use in schools, and reluctance at not having them is balanced with some of the violence that occurs in the schools. And parents do want to be able to call their child or contact their child in an emergency. And those are both good points. And I think overall the point is technology isn't bad. Technology use that compromises communication and hearing is something that we need to think about. We do want to make sure that the use of technology serves the roles that it was designed to serve, but doesn't supplant face-to-face communication and interaction, that human element that somebody spoke about earlier. You know, we even, as we're learning new things, I don't know about you, but have you ever tried to learn how to put a table together or how to put on new wiper blades? You know, you can go to your devices and read the instructions, but don't you learn better when somebody actually shows you how to do it? Or don't you have much more meaningful, deep conversations when they're face-to-face than you do through an exchange of text or email? You know, because you can dive deeper, you can be more detailed, you can really say it the way you want to say it. It's so much easier to say it rather than text it or type it. So that is really important. So let's talk for a moment about how can we control the use of technology in our day-to-day lives. What do we do to control technology? What are you doing, or what are you thinking about doing with your friends, your family, your colleagues at work? What should we do to communicate and to limit the use of technology appropriately in our day-to-day lives? Any ideas? Here's a couple comments about somebody in a school meeting said that it was helpful for students who have poor social skills to use their phone for something to do. And the individual, Alyssa, was horrified by that statement. And justifiably so. We don't, again, learn any new skill without practicing it. And so if you're always plugged into a device, not a communication device, but your regular devices, then how are you going to learn those nuances of communication? I've read a few articles already in business communication publications that talk about some of the new graduates don't really have those collaboration and communication skills that are so important to success in the real world, in the business world. You know, they may be a little more abrupt in their communication. They're not turn-taking appropriately. They're not really able to process and listen and process the information that's coming to them verbally, and that has been a concern expressed in some. Somebody talked about we need to turn off the phones at times. She talked about, I attended a meeting where the speaker, a person in leadership, stopped talking to answer a text message. So during a meeting or a communication, how important was that text message? We all do need to model appropriate device use. Somebody else suggested perhaps we could set our usage for hours of when tech time is appropriate. He says his son has to turn off his device at 8 p.m. each evening and has an hour or so to decompress, read, unwind from technology use before bed. I think those are all very good things. What else do we do to control technology use in our everyday lives? That on-off button is so important, or that somebody mentioned, modeling. What do we want our families to do? Are we modeling what it is that we want them to do? I think it's really important. Think about, even, you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, there's so much learning that goes on. There's so many programs or apps that children can use to learn about things, whether it's science or social studies or little ones, you know, things like animals. But just think about the things that you remember most. Are they things that you read about in a book, or are they online or on a text or in a program, or are they things that you actually experienced? My son talked about this. I have young grandchildren, and his son was fascinated about cows, and so he was looking at pictures of cows. There were some little programs that talked about cows, and so he knew a lot. But then when they went to a farm and he experienced the sight, the touch, the feel, the smell of cows, he really had a very different perspective about what those were all about. And I think that's so true in so many things that we're learning about. Some ideas, they said they like the ideas of tech-free zones at home and in the workplace. Maybe in the workplace, the staff coffee room might be a good place to have tech-free. Emphasizing that it's okay to turn off a device or have your phone off for a bit. How many of you, like me, have been on a plane when we were asked to turn off all our devices and had people getting real anxious about turning those devices off? Now apparently we can keep them on, but keep them on the airplane mode, and that seems to be a little more comforting. But why are we concerned about turning off devices now and then? There's very little communication that won't wait for just a little bit of time from time to time. So let's talk about this last question. What will you do today as a result of hearing this information? Any ideas? I see some people are typing, so I'll wait just a moment. I know I made some changes in my life when I saw the results of this survey and then last year's survey, shared it with some friends, especially with young children. Here we go. There should be no use of them. There should be a lot of no use with them turning it off more often. 30 minutes of earbud time for your entire family is what somebody suggested. When appropriate, discussing this survey with families that you work with. Again, being aware of the hearing aspect of use of earbuds. And the reason those earbuds especially are of concern is they go right into that ear canal, whereas at least a headphone, it's kind of diffused a little bit on the outside, but sending those loud sounds directly into that ear canal really can disturb hearing a lot more quickly. And we are seeing evidence of increased hearing loss, probably noise-induced hearing loss, in younger and younger children, and certainly in teenagers and young adults. We really attribute that directly to the overuse of very high volumes of device use. Any other ideas about what you think you would like to do or will do as a result of this? Somebody here that SLPs are relying more and more on apps use during their therapy. And I think that's true, and maybe limiting to that, or perhaps being very judicious about using your device. Certainly you might present initially some information through a device, through an app, but then practicing it and trying to generalize that information and skill in more conversation. Or at least having conversation across the device. Don't just plug them in, or which I'm sure most of you don't, but even as a family member, as a parent, as well as a practitioner, don't just plug into a device, but if your child or your student is using a device, talk through what they're seeing, what they're doing, what their questions are. That's really important to do. Anything else any other questions or concerns that you have as a result of what we've talked about today? I'll wait a few minutes to let people talk through or post their messages about this. But the last slide that you have in front of us is the resources that are available. We have a lot of resources about Better Hearing Speech Month. There's all the results of the survey. There's some suggestions. There's some good links about things to do to celebrate better hearing and speech. Communication for a lifetime. That part of the ASHA website has a lot of our consumer information. So if you need to share information with parents, students, colleagues, that's a good resource. Identify the Signs of Communication Disorders information is available at identifythesigns.org. So both hearing and verbal communication issues are covered there. Dangerous Decibels Public Health Campaign. It's a very interesting campaign and suggest that you check out at the dangerousdecibels.org as listed on the PowerPoint. The Listen to Your Buds campaign. That's a campaign that ASHA has designed to make children much more aware of hearing and noise-induced hearing loss. And it's a nice, we go out and do assemblies at schools from time to time, especially in the cities where we have our convention. There's a lot of resources and materials there to help you engage children in the issue of hearing loss and how it happens. How does your child hear and talk? Developmental milestones, again, something helpful to share with others, and to be aware of yourself as a parent, as a clinician, as a teacher, those kinds of things. Healthy People 2020, Hearing and Other Sensory Communication Disorders. This speaks to where should we be as a country in terms of healthy hearing and communication. It's very good resources there. And then Noisy Planet also is a good resource for talking about and learning more about noise and its impact on communication. And there's a question about, will the slides be made available? And I'm not sure, but my email address is D as in dog, D-I-X-O-N, D Dixon, at ASHA.org. So if you are interested in getting any of the PowerPoint or have any more questions about this topic, feel free to email me. You can also go to the ASHA website and find a lot more other resources. But we really think this is an important discussion to have, not only with those of you that are here, but our purpose in today's presentation and conversation really is just to get people thinking about it. Are we using technology too much? And some days the answer may be no, and other days it may be yes. But thinking about that, and then if you are having concerns about overuse of technology and its impact on communication, start thinking about, so what are some things that we can do? To me, it was very encouraging to see that teenagers are indeed willing to adhere to some guidelines and some rules about technology use, and that they do have concerns about the impact of technology on their communication and specifically their hearing. None of us, we know that as we age from day one, we're going to be losing little bits of ourselves from time to time, but we don't want to deliberately contribute to loss of anything, especially hearing loss and communication loss. So it's important to just be thoughtful about all of this and to move forward in ways that enhance communication and hearing rather than impede it. So I certainly appreciate all of you being here today. Again, any other questions or things that you'd like to talk about with communication in general, hearing loss in general, those kinds of things, I'll stay on for a few more minutes and answer any questions that you may have. I see a couple people typing, so I'm going to stay on here. Mostly thank yous for the resources, and you're certainly welcome. All right, well, if I don't see any other questions, again, you have my email, so feel free to get in touch with me. But more importantly, start these conversations. Start these conversations with your colleagues, start your conversations with your family, with your friends. There's a question here, does ASHA have a plan to encourage this and give people some ideas? And yes, I mean, this campaign, the Identify the Signs campaign, is an ongoing campaign, the Listen to Your Buds, and we have continued to promote the information that we have found both in this year's surveys as well as last year's surveys. We've done some PR segments on various local and national programs, radio and television programs, and we are always continuing to try to encourage dialogue around these very important topics, because we know that we certainly, those of us in the field, think that communication certainly is important to quality of life, and we want to make sure that everybody's doing what they can to encourage good communication. So thank you very much for your time today. This will be available afterwards, and it might be something, the presentation itself. So thank you very much for your time. Go out there and protect those ears and do some face-to-face communication with somebody, and put them down that device for at least a short period of your day. Thank you very much, and I've been pleased to interact with you here.